What's up, my nerds? What's up, my blurs? It's me, Art, the indie comic book guy. Today, we're going to talk about something that a lot of comic book creators want to know. What they want to know is, do you need an editor? I know a lot of people that are creating comics, a lot of people that want to create comics, and they are all asking this same question. Do you need an editor? Now, before I dive into that, let's discuss what an editor is and what an editor is not, because there are many people out there claiming to be editors without any literary experience, without any writing experience outside of editing books for their friends and relying on recommendations from, again, their friends. If a publisher hasn't hired any of these people directly, do not trust them. Just because they say, oh, I edited a story that's being published by this publisher or that publisher. Did the publisher hire him or her? If the answer is no, that means they worked freelance for the writer. That doesn't mean that they actually work directly with the publisher. There's a difference. If a publisher is willing to invest time, money, and resources into this individual, that means that individual has merit. However, if they were merely hired by the writer to help enhance the story, that doesn't mean that publisher believed in them. It doesn't even mean that the publisher even heard of this person. So, be on the lookout for that. There are a lot of stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home dads that are claiming to be editors. Heck, I can claim that I'm an editor right now, pop out a website, put some testimonials from my friends, boom, I'm a professional editor. It's that easy. It's one of those things where anyone can claim to be an editor, but the results will vary. So remember that. If a publisher has not hired him or her, be careful. You get what you pay for in some instances. You really do. Now, there are a lot of type of editors out there. A lot of different types. You have line editors. You have copy editors. You have developmental editors. Those are just a few. But in the world of comic books, you don't have that many positions. It's kind of like everything is rolled up into one position or two positions or three positions. So it's a lot different from book editors in that sense, or working with a big publishing house. So just remember that. Now, before we get into the different types of editors out there for your would-be comic book project, be mindful. Some of these scammer editors are watching this video, and they will update their portfolio and say, oh, I do this. I also offer this service. I'll also do this. Be mindful. If they haven't worked directly with a publishing house, do not hire this person. I can't stress this enough. And the reason being, it's not that these scammers, and some of them aren't scammers, some of them are just trying to hustle and make ends meet. It's just that merit and that experience. You see, Marvel and DC, for example, they are not mentoring assistant editors and giving them the chance to grow into being full-time editors. They're not doing that anymore. They're not doing that anymore. When I grew up, Marvel used to do a fun thing. They would call it Assistant Editor Month, where they would have a whole line of comic books that the assistant editor saw through the whole production, and boom, this is what you got. It was a fun thing. It was a fun thing. But those days are gone. Now, things have changed. The industry has changed. So let's talk about some of these positions. Again, as I said earlier, in the book world, the publishing world, you have line editors, copy editors, blah, 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 developmental editors. In comics, it's a little different. Let's start with assistant editors. Now, in the indie comic book world, you won't deal with assistant editors that much. A lot of these companies don't have them. They have an editor-in-chief. They may have a production line editor or someone who serves that purpose, and that's it. And a lot of times, The editor is just the person that's mainly overseeing the production. They are looking at the final proof and seeing if there's any changes made before it's sent to the printer. That's it. You'd be surprised at how many publishers out there, both big and small, don't really have someone who takes the time and go line by line and read the script and look for errors, look for grammar, spelling errors. They don't do that in some cases. Some cases, they have great editorial teams who will take on the role of a copy editor, who will take on the role of a developmental editor, of a group editor, editor-in-chief. It varies depending on publisher to publisher. So, again, let's look at an assistant editor. What do they do? In the comic book world, if there is an assistant editor, their job is to mainly function as a copy editor. They are going to look at the script. They're going to go line for line like a line editor, look for spelling, grammar mistakes. They're going to make sure that the script makes sense. Now, once that's approved by the assistant editor, then they'll turn it over to the editor, and that editor of that book will look it over and be like, okay, let's start production on this book. Now, once the art comes in, that same editor may review the art again and see if there's any changes to be made before it goes into the lettering or coloring process. Or it may be passed off to a different editor whose job is to make sure everything is ready for print. So sometimes you can have one person fulfill all these duties. Sometimes you can have a whole bunch of them, just depending on the size of the company. So we touched on assistant editor. Now I mentioned a developmental editor. What in a developmental editor, sounds like I'm saying an elemental editor. Once someone's in charge of developing a line of comics for a publisher, their job is to hire talent, whether it's a writer, artist, letterer, colorist, etc. They want to develop new properties for that company. Once they develop these new properties, then big announcements made, they release these books. That developmental editor is going to help oversee that line of books. And oftentimes that developmental editor becomes a group editor. It can vary. Again, depending on the size of the company, this may all just be one editor that does all this, or it may be several people. I just want you to be mindful of some of the roles that come along. Now, when you're creating your own comic book, again, do you need an editor? Do you need any of these people? That's the $1,000,000 question. Now, let's say my friend, let's call him Frank. Frank is a writer. He loves comics, read them all his life. He decides, I want to make a comic book. So he writes a script, hires an artist. He's like, we're good, let's do this. The pages start coming in. He wrote a fantastic scene where his character, let's just call him Super M. Super M is standing on top of a building. There's a little girl down below eating an ice cream. What Super M doesn't know, which will be revealed several pages later, is the little girl eating ice cream is really a demon. And she's going to morph into a demon and they're going to have a big epic fight, blah, 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 blah. So, where does the editor come in and all this? Okay. It's wrote in the script, page 1. Now, the writer, my friend Frank, he doesn't notice that the artist failed to draw the little girl on page 1. Now on page 7, she's a full-fledged demon. Where did this demon come from? We never even seen him morph. A good editor will spot those things. A good editor will let you know, like, hey, where did this demon come from? Oh, well, it was in the script. She was on page 1 and on page 3 you saw her morphing. We didn't see any of this. It's always good to have a second set of eyes on these books. That way they can catch those little things. They can also catch mistakes in the script that don't make sense. You establish like, oh, my character, they got bit by a radioactive cockroach and now they have cockroach powers. Yeah, Rochelle was a real book. Then, next thing you know, the character's flying. Where did this ability come from? Where did this come from? You need someone who will understand the lore that is being established. You need somebody who will catch those story mistakes. Things that have been established, we need to roll with those. We can't just undo them. Well, Marvel and DC does it all the time, but that's a different story. When you're first starting out, you want your story to make sense. So, hiring an editor with experience is a good idea. Now, there are some people out there who have never used an editor a day of their life. They're making great comic books. So, hiring an editor, yeah, it's nice. Do you need one? Only in the sense that you want a second set of eyes on that story. You definitely want somebody to look at the grammar, look at the spelling, and review the story to look for mistakes. Now, I asked the other day on my Facebook, I was like, hey, what do artists think about redrawing pages? Most of them said no, they hate it. That's going to be a whole different video. The reason I mention it now is because I want you to be mindful of what an editor does. They will get the roughs from the penciler and they will look over it to make sure everything matches up with that script. How many times have creators hired an artist who just completely ignored half the script and you're like, I'm paying you money, but you didn't draw this, you didn't draw that. A good editor can help you. They can help you. Now, they can't fix everything. An editor's job is not to make a bad writer good. Because if you're a bad writer, you're just a bad writer. Take some writing classes to try to improve. Take a film class. I always recommend that to any comic book writer. Take a class on film. Artists take classes on film and animation so you can learn storyboarding. All these things will help. Now, back to editing. Do you need one? That's always the question. Again, it's always a good idea to get a second set of eyes on that project. But with more experience, you will catch some of these things yourself. And a lot of writers, they will contact each other and they'll be like, hey, I need a beta reader. I need somebody to look at the script, make sure it makes sense. And not your friends. Notice, I'm not saying to call your friends up. Your friends will lie to you. Your friends will just be like, oh, yeah, bravo. Anything you do, bravo. Yeah, we love it. We love it. Scammers will do the same thing. They will do a quick 1-2. Oh, I looked at the grammar. I looked at the spelling. The story seems okay with me. They may give you a couple suggestions, but if an editor that you hire with your money isn't giving you a page-by-page synopsis of what's right, what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, fire him or her immediately. They're just taking your money. No script is perfect. An editor's job is to help you get it as close to perfect as they can. Especially if you're paying them your hard-earned money. So, again, let's go over this one more time. You can have an assistant editor whose job basically is to function as a copy editor. You can have a developmental editor whose job is to help develop the script along with the art. And then you can have someone who basically serves as a production editor. Basically, their job is to get these comic ready for print. You know, they're kind of like a proofreader, but for comics. So the production editor will get that done. They will make sure all the files are right, the story's right, the coloring, all that good stuff. And then it'll go to the printer. That's it. Again, in the world of indie comics, all this can be handled by one person or no one. but the writer. It does happen like that. But I just want to answer this question real quick. Hopefully this helps. I'll see you in the next video. I'm the Indie Comic Guy.